She didn't return home. She walked into a system designed to erase her freedom. Elizabeth stepped out of the car without waiting for the driver to open the door, her boots hitting the dry Texas ground with a firmness that felt more like defiance than arrival. The air was heavier than she remembered, thick with heat, dust, and something older, expectation. The ranch stretched endlessly in front of her, familiar in structure, yet distant in feeling. Every fence, every stable, every measured line of land whispered the same thing. This place had never changed. She had. The main house stood exactly as it always had. White walls, wide porch, perfect symmetry. It wasn't just a home. It was a statement of control. Every detail placed to signal power, tradition, and permanence. Elizabeth paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the windows as if expecting them to look back at her. She felt it immediately. That quiet pressure. The unspoken rules. She had spent years in Europe learning how to live without them. And now they closed in again the second she crossed the property line. The door opened before she reached it. A maid she didn't recognize greeted her with a polite nod, no warmth, just function. Elizabeth stepped inside. The smell was the same, polished wood, old leather, and something faintly metallic beneath it. She placed her bag down slowly, her gaze moving across the room. Nothing had changed, not a single object out of place. It was as if time here had been frozen on purpose. "You're late." The voice came from deeper inside the house, calm and precise. Elizabeth didn't need to turn to know who it was. Marcus never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His control was built into the way he spoke, the way he stood, the way he occupied space without ever appearing to try. "I arrived when I intended to," Elizabeth replied, finally stepping further into the room. Her tone was even, but not submissive. That, more than anything, was new. Marcus entered the room a second later, already dressed as if he had a meeting to attend. Crisp shirt, no sign of dust, no sign of the land he claimed to run. His eyes moved over her, not with affection, but with assessment. Measuring, adjusting, calculating. "You've been away too long," he said. Elizabeth met his gaze without hesitation. "Or just long enough." A brief silence settled between them. Not empty, charged. The kind that carried history without needing to explain it. Marcus stepped closer, his attention shifting to the bag she had placed on the floor. "Europe suits you," he added, though there was no approval in his voice. Only observation. "It taught me perspective," Elizabeth answered. "It taught you distance," Marcus corrected. She didn't respond to that, because he wasn't wrong. But he also wasn't right in the way he thought he was. Footsteps echoed from the hallway behind them. Slower, heavier. Their father appeared, his presence filling the room in a way Marcus's never could. Where Marcus was control, their father was weight. Authority built over time, not calculation. Elizabeth. This time, there was something warmer in the voice. Not soft, but real. She turned to him, and for a brief second, the tension in her shoulders shifted. Not gone, just altered. "Father." He approached her without hesitation, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. Not an embrace. Not quite, but closer than anything Marcus had offered. "You made it back," he said. "I said I would." He studied her for a moment longer, as if trying to read what had changed and what hadn't. "This place hasn't," he finally added. "I noticed." Marcus exhaled quietly, almost impatiently. "Stability isn't a flaw." "No," Elizabeth said, turning slightly toward him. "But neither is change." Another silence. Sharper this time. Their father stepped back, breaking the line between them before it could tighten further. "You'll have time to argue philosophy later. For now, you should rest." "I'm not tired," Elizabeth replied. That was true. What she felt wasn't fatigue. It was resistance. "Then reacquaint yourself with the ranch," he said. "It's still yours as much as it is ours." Marcus didn't react outwardly, but Elizabeth caught the shift in his expression. Small, controlled, but there. "Of course," she said. She didn't wait for dismissal. She turned, picked up her bag, and moved toward the back exit instead of the stairs. Neither of them stopped her, but she could feel their attention follow her anyway. Outside, the air hit her again, stronger this time, or maybe she was just more aware of it now. The house behind her felt heavier than before, like something closing rather than welcoming. She didn't head toward the guest quarters. She didn't need rest. She needed space. Her steps carried her instinctively toward the stables. The path was unchanged, packed dirt and worn lines carved by years of repetition. The closer she got, the more the atmosphere shifted. The rigid silence of the house gave way to something alive. The sound of hooves shifting, quiet breaths, the low movement of animals that didn't care about hierarchy or expectation. Elizabeth slowed as she reached the entrance, her hand brushing lightly against the wooden frame before stepping inside. The scent hit her immediately. Hay, leather, warmth. Real, unfiltered. For the first time since arriving, something inside her eased. Not completely, but enough to notice the difference. A horse shifted in its stall, drawing her attention. She stepped closer, her movements slower now, more deliberate. The animal watched her, alert but not afraid. Hey, she murmured softly, reaching out. The horse hesitated for a second before leaning slightly into her hand. That was something she understood. Not control, not pressure, just presence. Elizabeth let out a quiet breath, her fingers brushing along the animal's neck. At least something here still makes sense. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. Not yet. The sound reached her not as noise, but as a shift in rhythm, subtle, controlled, deliberate. Elizabeth didn't turn immediately. Whoever it was moved with purpose, not hesitation. That alone told her enough. This wasn't one of the stable hands trying to avoid attention. This was someone who belonged here. You're holding her wrong. The voice was calm, low, and certain. Not confrontational. Not deferential either. Just fact. Elizabeth's hand paused for a fraction of a second before she slowly turned. He stood a few steps behind her, close enough to observe, far enough not to intrude. Tall, sun-worn, his posture relaxed but grounded. There was dust on his boots, a faint crease in his shirt, signs of actual work, not display. His eyes weren't scanning her the way Marcus's did. They were focused, direct. I'm not holding her, Elizabeth replied evenly. I'm letting her decide. A brief silence followed. Not empty, evaluative. He stepped closer, not rushed, not cautious. The horse shifted slightly, acknowledging him before settling again. That was the second thing Elizabeth noticed. The animal trusted him without needing reassurance. Animals don't decide, he said. They respond. Elizabeth tilted her head slightly, studying him now with the same precision he had used on her. That sounds like control. It's understanding, he corrected. He reached out, his hand moving with quiet certainty, adjusting her position by a few centimeters. Not grabbing, not forcing, just redirecting. The horse exhaled, tension releasing almost immediately. Elizabeth felt it. The difference was undeniable. That wasn't force, she admitted. No, he said. It was timing. Another pause. This one softer. Elizabeth, she said after a moment, not as introduction, but as statement. I know. There was no arrogance in it. Just information already processed. Of course he knew. Everyone here did. Caleb, he added. She nodded once. The name fit. Simple. Direct. No excess. You work here, she said. I run this part of it, Caleb answered. Not a correction. A clarification. Elizabeth glanced around the stables, then back at him. Then you're the one actually keeping it alive. Caleb didn't react immediately, but something in his expression shifted. Not offense, not pride. Recognition. I do my job, he said. That's not the same thing. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them changed, not tense, but aware. Elizabeth stepped slightly to the side, giving him space with the horse. Show me, she said. Caleb raised an eyebrow, just slightly. Show you what? What you meant. He watched her for a second longer, as if measuring whether this was curiosity or challenge. It was both. Without another word, he turned back to the horse, his movements precise but unforced. He adjusted the lead, shifted his stance, changed the angle of his body just enough to guide rather than push. The horse responded immediately. Not dramatically, just correctly. Elizabeth paid attention. Not to the action itself, but to the timing. The sequence. The restraint. You don't rush, she said. If you rush, you lose the moment, Caleb replied. And if the moment passes, then you wait for the next one. She let that settle. It wasn't just about the horse. You learn that here? She asked. Caleb gave a small shrug. You learn it if you stay long enough. Elizabeth looked at the animal again, then back at him. And if you don't stay, then you never understand what you left. That landed differently than the rest. She held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, then looked away first. Not out of submission, out of thought. Marcus thinks in outcomes, she said quietly. Caleb didn't respond. He skips everything in between. That's why he'll never be good with animals, Caleb said. Elizabeth almost smiled. Not fully, but close. And people? She asked. Caleb met her eyes again. That depends on what he wants from them. Silence followed. He wasn't guessing. He knew. Elizabeth exhaled slowly, her attention shifting back to the horse. I forgot this part, she admitted. Then remember it, Caleb said. Simple. Direct. No weight added. She ran her hand along the horse's neck again, this time adjusting without thinking. The animal didn't pull away. Better. Caleb noticed. He didn't comment. That's improvement, she said anyway. That's listening, he corrected. Elizabeth glanced at him. You correct people a lot. Only when they're wrong. And I was. He held her gaze without hesitation. At first, a pause. Then, fair. The word came easier than expected. Outside, the light had shifted slightly, the late afternoon stretching shadows across the open land beyond the stables. Time had moved without either of them noticing. Elizabeth stepped back, brushing her hands lightly together. I should go before Marcus decides I've disappeared again. Caleb didn't stop her, but he didn't look away either. You don't have to explain where you are, he said. Elizabeth turned slightly toward him. In this place. A brief beat. Yes, Caleb said. She studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether that was naive or honest. Maybe, she said, but that doesn't mean there won't be consequences. Caleb nodded once. There always are. That, at least, they agreed on. Elizabeth moved toward the exit, then paused just before stepping out. Timing, she said, glancing back at him. Caleb's expression didn't change. Timing. She left the stables without looking back again. But this time, the weight of the ranch felt different. Not lighter, just no longer unfamiliar. Elizabeth didn't return to the house immediately. Instead, her steps carried her past the main path, beyond the controlled symmetry of the central grounds, into the open stretch of land that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Dry grass bent under the wind. Uneven terrain broke the illusion of perfection, and the fences here were older, less maintained, but more honest. She walked without a clear destination, her mind replaying the last hour in fragments. Not the words themselves, but the structure beneath them. Caleb didn't explain more than necessary. He didn't perform. Every response had a function. That alone set him apart from everything waiting for her inside the house. By the time the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the fields, Elizabeth had reached the far edge of the western pasture. The silence here was different. Not controlled. Not imposed. Just natural. You're avoiding dinner. She didn't turn this time either. The voice was familiar, but not expected here. Observing, Elizabeth replied. Marcus stepped up beside her, his presence cutting cleanly through the stillness. He was out of place here. Not visibly. His posture remained composed, his clothes untouched by the environment. But in the way he stood, like the land was something to be evaluated rather than understood. You always did prefer distance when you didn't want to answer questions, he said. And you always assumed every silence required interrogation, she returned. Marcus glanced across the pasture, his gaze scanning, calculating. You went to the stables. Not a question. Yes. You met Caleb. Again, statement. Elizabeth finally turned her head slightly toward him. You keep track of everything? Only what matters. There it was. Not subtle. Not hidden. Just stated as fact. And he matters? She asked. Marcus shifted his attention to her fully now. Everyone on this ranch matters. In proportion to their function. Elizabeth let out a quiet breath. That's one way to define people. It's the correct way if you intend to run something this size, without losing control. The word lingered. Control. Elizabeth crossed her arms loosely, not defensive, but contained. And if control isn't the goal, Marcus's expression didn't change. Then you lose everything. Silence followed. The wind moved through the grass, breaking the stillness in a way neither of them did. You've been back less than a day, he continued. And you're already stepping outside structure. I walked to the stables, Elizabeth said. You went past them, Marcus corrected. A small detail, but intentional. She looked at him more directly now. You had someone follow me? I had someone notice, he replied. Not denial. Elizabeth held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away first, not yielding, but choosing not to escalate. Not yet. You don't trust variables, she said. I eliminate them. That's not the same thing. It achieves the same result. Elizabeth shook her head slightly. No, it just delays the consequences. Marcus studied her, this time with more focus. Europe didn't just give you perspective. It gave you resistance. It gave me clarity. And the technical background to dismantle the very logistics you're trying to build, she added. A few years at a Brussels firm focused on infrastructure transparency teaches you where the skeletons are buried in a balance sheet. Clarity doesn't protect assets, he said. Elizabeth's expression hardened, just slightly. I'm not an asset. Another pause. Shorter. Sharper. To the business, Marcus said, you are. There was no emotion in it. That made it worse. Elizabeth turned fully toward him now. And to you? For the first time, Marcus didn't answer immediately. That was the answer. She nodded once, slow, controlled. Understood. The distance between them didn't change physically, but something shifted anyway. A line, now visible. Marcus adjusted his cuff slightly, a small habitual movement. Dinner starts in 10 minutes. You should be there. Or what? His gaze met hers, steady. Or you confirm that you're unwilling to participate. Elizabeth almost smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. Participation isn't the same as agreement. It is in practice, Marcus said. She stepped past him, not waiting for dismissal. Then you should prepare for disappointment. Marcus didn't stop her, but as she walked back toward the house, she could feel it again, not just observation this time, but calculation actively adjusting. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Staff moved with increased precision, the dining area already prepared with exact alignment. Nothing out of place. Nothing left to chance. Elizabeth entered without hesitation. Her father was already seated. Marcus followed a few seconds later, as if the timing had been measured in advance. She took her seat without waiting for instruction. Dinner began without formal announcement. For the first few minutes, only the sound of cutlery and controlled movement filled the room. Then, you visited the stables. Her father's voice, not accusatory, just present. Yes. A brief pause. And Elizabeth set her fork down, not loudly, but deliberately enough to shift attention. They're functioning, because the people working there understand what they're doing. Marcus didn't react outwardly. Her father nodded once. They always have. Elizabeth held his gaze. Not because of policy. A longer silence followed. Her father leaned back slightly in his chair, considering. You're suggesting change. I'm suggesting awareness, she corrected. Marcus spoke then, his tone even. Awareness without structure leads to inconsistency. Elizabeth didn't look at him. Structure without awareness leads to failure. The tension sharpened. Not explosive. Controlled. Their father watched both of them, his expression unreadable for a moment longer. Enough, he said finally. Not raised, but final. The conversation stopped. Dinner continued. Her father didn't look at Marcus. Instead, he watched Elizabeth for a long moment, his thumb tracing a worn groove in the mahogany table, a silent sign of internal friction that Marcus, blinded by his own charts, completely failed to register. But the silence now wasn't neutral. It was loaded, and for the first time since returning, Elizabeth understood something clearly. This wasn't just about fitting back into the ranch. It was about deciding whether she ever would. Morning came early on the ranch, not by schedule, but by necessity. The first light didn't wait for permission. It simply cut through the horizon and forced everything into motion. Elizabeth was already awake when it did, not because she had adjusted, but because sleep had never fully settled. She didn't stay in the house long enough for conversation. No breakfast. No acknowledgement. By the time the staff began their routine, she was already outside, moving with intention rather than aimlessness this time. The stables were active when she arrived. Not chaotic, but alive in a way the house never was. Workers moved with efficiency that didn't need to be announced. Horses shifted, breathed, reacted. Nothing here was static. Caleb was already there. He stood near the far end, focused on adjusting a saddle, his movements precise and unhurried despite the pace around him. He didn't look up when she entered. Not immediately. You're early, he said, as if he had tracked her presence without needing to see it. You're consistent, Elizabeth replied, stepping closer. That's part of the job. She stopped beside him, watching the way his hands worked, controlled, practiced, without wasted motion. Or part of who you are. Caleb tightened the last strap before finally glancing at her. Those usually end up the same thing. Elizabeth nodded slightly. That made sense. What happens today? She asked. Caleb gestured subtly toward the open space beyond the stables. Training. Conditioning. Same as every day. No variation? There's always variation, he said. Just not in the structure. She folded her arms loosely, studying the activity around them. Marcus would approve. Caleb didn't respond to that directly. Instead, he handed her a pair of gloves from a nearby post. Put those on. Elizabeth looked at them, then back at him. That wasn't a suggestion. No. A brief pause. She took them anyway. The leather was worn, shaped by use rather than design. Functional. Real. She pulled them on without comment. Caleb picked up the reins of the horse he had been preparing and nodded toward the open gate. Walk with me. They moved out of the stables together, side by side, but not touching. The space between them wasn't distance. It was awareness. Outside, the ground was uneven, the kind that required attention rather than assumption. Elizabeth adjusted quickly, her steps steady despite the terrain. Caleb noticed. He didn't say anything. Most people try to control from the front, he said after a few moments. Elizabeth glanced at him. And you don't. I guide from the side. He demonstrated without stopping, shifting his position slightly, adjusting the tension just enough for the horse to follow rather than resist. Elizabeth watched carefully. That requires trust. It requires consistency, Caleb corrected. She considered that. Trust is built from consistency. Caleb gave a small nod. Exactly. They reached the training area, a wide-open stretch bordered by low fencing. A few other riders were already working, their movements coordinated but individual. No one stopped when Caleb entered, but there was a subtle shift, acknowledgement without disruption. He handed her the reins. Elizabeth looked at them, then at him. You're serious. You said you wanted to understand. I didn't say I was ready. Caleb's expression didn't change. Same thing. A beat passed. Elizabeth took the reins. The horse reacted immediately, not aggressively, but alert. Testing. She adjusted her grip instinctively, then paused. Too fast. She corrected, loosening slightly, matching the rhythm she had seen earlier. The horse settled. Not completely, but enough. Caleb watched, not interfering. Timing, she said quietly. Timing, he confirmed. She guided the horse forward, step by step. Not perfect, not smooth, but intentional. For a few minutes, nothing else existed. Not the ranch. Not Marcus. Not the weight of expectation. Just movement and response. Cause and effect. Then, that's not how this works. The voice cut through the space sharply, controlled but unmistakably disruptive. Elizabeth stopped. The horse reacted to the shift immediately, tension returning. She turned. Marcus stood at the edge of the training area, his presence as composed as ever, but out of place in a way that was impossible to ignore. He hadn't come to observe. He had come to intervene. Caleb didn't move. Elizabeth handed the reins back to him before stepping forward, closing part of the distance between herself and her brother. Then explain how it does, she said. Marcus's gaze flicked briefly to Caleb, then back to her. You don't participate in operations without understanding the structure. I'm learning, Elizabeth replied. From him, the question wasn't about information. It was about hierarchy. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. Yes. A brief silence followed. Not long. Just enough. Marcus stepped closer, his attention now fully fixed on her. That's inefficient. For you, she said. For the ranch, he corrected. Elizabeth shook her head slightly. You keep saying that like they're the same thing. They are, Marcus said. No, she replied, her tone steady. They're only the same as long as no one challenges you. The air shifted again, this time sharper. Marcus held her gaze, measuring. You've been back less than 24 hours. And I already see the problem, Elizabeth said. Caleb stepped in then. Not between them, but close enough to break the direct line. Subtle. Controlled. Training time, he said, not looking at Marcus. It wasn't defiance. It was prioritization. Marcus's eyes moved to him slowly. You're overstepping. Caleb met his gaze without hesitation. I'm doing my job. Another silence. Heavier this time. Elizabeth didn't look away from either of them. For a moment, it felt like something would break. But Marcus stepped back first. Not retreat. Adjustment. This isn't over, he said to Elizabeth. It hasn't started, she replied. That was the first real line drawn. Not implied. Not hidden. Marcus turned and walked away without another word. The tension didn't leave with him. It stayed, lingering in the space he had occupied. Elizabeth exhaled slowly, her attention shifting back to Caleb. "You just made yourself a problem," she said. Caleb picked up the reins again, his movements unchanged. "I already was." She studied him for a second longer. "Then now it's official," she said. Caleb glanced at her briefly. "Good." No hesitation. No regret. Elizabeth felt it then. Not pressure, not expectation. Something else. Alignment. For the first time since returning, she wasn't just reacting to the ranch. She was choosing where to stand within it. By midday, the rhythm of the ranch had fully taken hold. Heat pressed down from above, flattening shadows and stripping everything to its essential form. There was no space for illusion here, only function, movement, and consequence. Elizabeth remained in the training area longer than she had intended, not because she needed to prove anything, but because leaving too early would mean returning to the house. And the house now felt less like a center and more like a boundary. Caleb didn't push her. He corrected when necessary, stayed silent when not. The pattern was consistent. No wasted words. No unnecessary presence. "You anticipate too early," he said at one point, watching her adjust the reins again. Elizabeth exhaled, slowing her movement. "I don't like waiting." "Then you'll keep making mistakes," Caleb replied. She glanced at him, not offended, just acknowledging the accuracy. "You're direct. It saves time." She almost smiled again. Almost. The horse shifted beneath her grip, testing. Elizabeth didn't react immediately this time. She waited. 1 second longer than instinct told her to. The response changed. Not resistance. Alignment. Caleb noticed. "Better." Elizabeth nodded slightly. Not satisfaction. Recognition. From the far edge of the field, movement drew her attention. A black SUV cut across the dirt road, its presence sharp against the open land. It didn't belong to the working side of the ranch. Too clean. Too deliberate. Caleb followed her gaze. "Visitors. Unscheduled." "Nothing here is unscheduled," he said. Elizabeth's expression tightened slightly. "Marcus." Caleb didn't confirm. He didn't need to. The vehicle came to a controlled stop near the main house. 2 men stepped out, their posture matching the environment they came from, corporate, measured, detached from the ground beneath their feet. Elizabeth handed the reins back without looking away. "What does he want today?" "Depends on what he's already decided," Caleb said. That answer didn't reassure her. It clarified the problem. She pulled off the gloves, setting them aside with more precision than necessary. "Then I should find out before it becomes irreversible." Caleb studied her for a brief moment. "You walking into that?" "Yes." "No plan." Elizabeth met his gaze. Observation first. Action second. A pause. Caleb nodded once. "Then don't react too fast." She held that for a second. Then, "Timing," she said. "Timing," he confirmed. Elizabeth turned and headed back toward the house, her pace controlled but not slow. The distance felt shorter this time, not because it was, but because she was no longer unsure of where she stood. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted again. Sharper. Focused. Staff moved with increased precision, voices lower, movements tighter. Something was already in motion. She followed the sound of conversation to the main office. The door was partially closed. Not enough to block sound. Enough to signal privacy. Elizabeth didn't knock. She pushed it open. Marcus stood near the desk, one of the men from the SUV beside him, the other reviewing documents laid out in clean, exact rows. Their father sat behind the desk, silent, watching. All 3 turned as she entered. "Perfect timing," Marcus said. Not surprised. Never surprised. Elizabeth stepped fully into the room, her gaze moving across the documents before settling on him. "I didn't realize we were hosting negotiations." "We're finalizing an agreement," Marcus corrected. "With?" she asked, though the answer was already visible in the posture, the suits, the distance. "Dalton Holdings," one of the men said, extending the name like it carried weight on its own. Elizabeth didn't acknowledge him directly. Her attention stayed on Marcus. "And what exactly are we giving them?" "Expansion rights," Marcus replied. "Infrastructure development. Long-term growth." She stepped closer to the desk, her eyes scanning the papers now. "Land divisions. Usage allocations. Contractual timelines." "You're selling access," she said. "We're securing the future," Marcus corrected. Elizabeth's gaze sharpened. By handing control to people who've never set foot on this land before today. They don't need to understand it, Marcus said. They need to invest in it. That's not the same thing. It doesn't have to be. The conversation tightened. Elizabeth turned slightly toward her father. You're agreeing to this? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved between them, measuring not just the argument, but the direction it was taking. It's a strong offer, he said finally. That's not what I asked. Another pause. Marcus stepped in before he could respond. This isn't a debate. Elizabeth looked back at him. It is if it affects my share. The word landed. Intentionally. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Slight. Controlled. Your share is part of the whole, he said. Which means I have a say, Elizabeth replied. No, Marcus said calmly. It means you have a stake. The distinction was clear and deliberate. Elizabeth's eyes dropped back to the documents, scanning faster now. Then she saw it. A clause buried in the structure. Ownership redistribution tied to marital status. Her gaze stilled. Strategic alliance, she said quietly. Marcus didn't respond. She looked up slowly. You're not just selling land. Silence. You're positioning me, she continued. One of the men shifted slightly, uncomfortable now. Not part of this layer. Elizabeth held Marcus's gaze. Whose son? Marcus answered without hesitation. Daniel Hayes. The name meant nothing to her personally, but everything structurally. Partnership through marriage, she said. Integration, Marcus corrected. Elizabeth let out a slow breath, the realization settling into something sharper than surprise. You planned this before I came back. Yes. No denial. She nodded once. And the public humiliation hasn't even started yet. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. You're overestimating the emotional component. And you're underestimating the consequences, she replied. Their father finally stood, his presence cutting through the tension. Enough. Both of them went silent. Not out of submission. Out of acknowledgement. He looked at Elizabeth directly. This conversation isn't finished. No, she said. It's not. Her gaze shifted back to Marcus one last time. That line had just moved. Further than before. Elizabeth turned and walked out without waiting for dismissal. This time, she didn't head toward the stables immediately. She stopped just outside the house, the weight of what she had seen settling into something clear. This wasn't just control. This was design. And she was already inside it. Elizabeth didn't go back inside immediately. She stayed outside the main house, standing in the heat that pressed down without emotion or agenda. Unlike the rooms behind her, the land here didn't pretend to be anything. It simply existed. Unfiltered. Unmanaged. That clarity made the situation inside the office even more precise in her mind. Marcus wasn't reacting to her return. He had anticipated it. The agreement, the clauses, the structure of control, none of it was new. She was simply the missing variable he had now accounted for. She turned sharply and walked, not toward the stables this time, but along the side path that circled the property. Faster now. Controlled urgency. Not panic. Calculation accelerating. By the time she reached the lower storage building near the old equipment yard, her breathing was steady again. The structure here was older, partially isolated from the main operations. Fewer eyes. Fewer rules. That's why she stopped. Because someone was already inside. Not Marcus. Not staff. Caleb. She paused at the doorway, watching through the half-open frame. He wasn't doing maintenance. He was going through documents. Not casually. Not randomly. Organized stacks. Separated categories. His expression was focused, but not surprised by what he was reading. Elizabeth stepped inside without announcing herself. You're not supposed to be here. Caleb didn't look up immediately. Neither are you. That stopped her for a fraction of a second. Then she moved closer. What are those? He finally looked at her. Records. That's obvious. A pause. Ranch transfers, he added. Her gaze sharpened instantly. From the main office? No. That was the part that mattered. Caleb slid one of the folders forward. Old holdings. Before Marcus reorganized everything. Elizabeth scanned the top page. Names. Dates. Land divisions that no longer matched current maps. This is archived, she said. It was supposed to stay that way, Caleb replied. She looked up at him now. Then why do you have it? Caleb hesitated only slightly. Because I noticed inconsistencies. That's not an answer. It is the only one that matters. Silence settled between them, heavier than before. Not tense in the same way as Marcus. Different. More grounded. more dangerous in its implications. Elizabeth flipped another page. Her eyes slowed, then stopped completely. This land section, she said quietly. It was never part of the ranch expansion. Caleb nodded once. It was absorbed later, she continued. Through restructuring, he said. She looked up at him sharply. Marcus. Caleb didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He didn't need to. Elizabeth set the folder down slowly. How long have you known this? A while, Caleb said. And you didn't say anything? I didn't have proof that mattered. That's not hesitation, she said. That's timing. Caleb's expression shifted slightly. Not approval. Not disagreement. Recognition of her understanding. Timing, he repeated. She exhaled slowly, processing faster now. These inconsistencies connect to the Dalton agreement. Yes. The simplicity of his answer made it worse. Elizabeth straightened slightly. Marcus isn't just expanding. No, Caleb said. He's consolidating. That word changed the shape of everything. Not growth. Not development. Control accumulation. Systematic. Intentional. Elizabeth turned slightly away, pacing one step, then stopping. And the marriage clause. It locks ownership into external alignment, Caleb finished. She looked back at him. So I become a stabilizer for the structure. Yes. Silence again. This one longer. Elizabeth shook her head slightly. He didn't just plan to remove variables. He built a system where I become one. Caleb closed the folder in front of him. That's one interpretation. What's the other? She asked. Caleb met her gaze. That you were always part of it. That landed differently. Not as accusation. As possibility. Elizabeth didn't respond immediately. She couldn't dismiss it, but she also wouldn't accept it without weight. Footsteps echoed faintly outside. Distant. Moving toward the main yard. Caleb noticed first. His posture shifted slightly, not defensive, but alert. They'll be looking for those, he said. Marcus. And others. Elizabeth closed the folder she had been reading and placed it back in alignment. Controlled. Precise. Then we don't leave them here. Caleb studied her for a moment. You're already deciding action. I said observation first, she replied. This is still observation. A faint pause. Fast observation, he said. She almost allowed a smile again. Almost. Timing changes when you understand the system, she said. Caleb nodded once. It always does. Outside, the footsteps drew closer. Elizabeth turned toward the exit, then stopped briefly. We're not done, she said quietly. Caleb didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. I know, he said. And for the first time, it wasn't just about her place in the ranch anymore. It was about what the ranch had been built to hide. The footsteps outside stopped briefly, then shifted direction. Not entering the storage building. Passing it. Deliberate. Controlled. That meant one thing. Whoever was searching already knew the layout, and more importantly, what they were allowed to disturb. Elizabeth stayed still for a second longer, listening. Then she moved. Not toward the exit, but deeper into the building. Caleb followed without question. Inside, the storage structure narrowed into a secondary corridor lined with older equipment and sealed crates. The air here was drier, heavier with age rather than use. Forgotten space. The kind people didn't check unless instructed. You've been here before, Elizabeth said quietly. Yes, Caleb replied. Frequently. Enough. That answer told her more than a number would have. They reached a back panel door, not locked in a modern sense, but secured with older mechanical restraint. Caleb placed his hand on it, hesitating only briefly before opening it. Beyond was a smaller room. Not storage. Archive. Elizabeth stepped inside first. Her eyes adjusted quickly. Rows of physical records. Old ledgers. Land maps. Transaction files predating digital systems. This isn't ranch storage, she said. No, Caleb confirmed. It's what was removed from it. She moved to the nearest shelf, pulling a folder. The paper inside was older than anything she had seen so far. Handwritten notes. Boundary changes. Names crossed out and rewritten. This predates Marcus, she said. By a lot, Caleb replied. Elizabeth scanned faster now. Then how does he have authority over it? He doesn't, Caleb said. That made her stop. She looked at him. Explain. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. He controls what's active, not what exists. A pause. And this? She asked, gesturing around. Exists, he said. That distinction mattered. Elizabeth turned back to the records, pulling another file. Her movements became more precise, less exploratory. Focused extraction of information now, not discovery. Then she saw it. A sequence of land transfers. Not random. Patterned. Each acquisition linked through intermediary holdings. Each step legally clean on its own, but structurally aligned toward consolidation. This isn't expansion, she said again, quieter now. No, Caleb repeated. It's assembly. Caleb nodded once. Elizabeth leaned back slightly, processing the full structure forming in her mind. He didn't build the ranch, she said. He reassembled it. Yes. She turned to him sharply. From what? Caleb hesitated. Not uncertainty. Wait. Fragments, he said. That wasn't an answer. It was avoidance. Elizabeth didn't push immediately. Instead, she set the folder down and looked at him directly. You've been protecting this. I've been observing it, he corrected. That's not different anymore. A beat. Footsteps again. Closer this time. Caleb moved slightly toward the door instinctively. Not defensive, procedural. Elizabeth noticed. You know who it is. Yes. Marcus. His people, Caleb said. That was worse. Elizabeth closed the file carefully. No rush. No panic. Just completion. Then we leave this untouched for now. Caleb looked at her. That means giving him space to act. I didn't say we stop, she replied. I said we observe longer. A pause. Then Caleb nodded once. Timing. The rhythm, she corrected herself. The pulse of the system, Caleb added. They moved back through the corridor together. No urgency, but no delay either. Controlled exit. As they reached the outer storage area, Elizabeth stopped briefly. This doesn't stay hidden forever, she said. It never does, Caleb replied. She looked at him for a second longer than before. Then when it breaks, it won't be accidental. Caleb met her gaze. Nothing here is. That statement hung between them longer than the rest. Outside, the footsteps shifted again, now moving away from the building. The search had passed. For now, Elizabeth stepped out into the open air, the heat returning instantly. But something inside the structure of the ranch had changed. Not physically, structurally. And she could feel it now. The system wasn't just controlling people. It was holding history in place. The moment they stepped out of the storage building, the ranch felt different again, not visibly, but in pressure. Like the air had been rearranged while they were underground. Elizabeth noticed it immediately. Small shifts in movement patterns. Staff avoiding certain paths. Security presence redistributed, subtle but intentional. Marcus had reacted. Not directly to them. To the system itself. Caleb didn't slow down. He walked beside her toward the stables, but his attention was divided now. Outward scanning, internal calculation. They know something's missing, Elizabeth said quietly. Yes, Caleb replied. That was fast. It means they were already close, he said. They reached the stable entrance. Caleb paused only briefly before stepping inside. Elizabeth followed. The familiar environment felt less safe now, not because it had changed, but because she understood its role more clearly. Control didn't need walls. It needed routine. Caleb moved to a side rack, placing his hand on a saddle as if nothing had happened. That steadiness was intentional. A reset. Elizabeth leaned against a post nearby. How long do we have before Marcus connects this? Caleb didn't answer immediately. He adjusted a strap, then spoke. He already has a suspicion. About us. About the archive, he corrected. That distinction mattered. Elizabeth exhaled slowly. Then he'll seal access points. Yes. And increase oversight. Yes. A pause. So this window is closing, she said. Caleb looked at her now. It's already narrowed. That was the first time he had said something without neutrality. Elizabeth straightened slightly. Then we stop reacting. What do you suggest? He asked. She thought for a moment. Not emotionally. Structurally. We shift the flow. Caleb raised an eyebrow slightly. Explain. If Marcus controls active systems, she said, then we stop engaging the active layer. She stepped away from the post, pacing slowly now. We work from inactive structure. Records. Patterns. Historical transfers. He can't defend what he's already hidden unless he exposes it. Caleb watched her carefully. That's escalation. It's precision, she corrected. A silence followed. Then Caleb nodded once. That aligns with timing. Elizabeth almost reacted to that, but didn't. Instead, she focused. We need access to everything that predates his restructuring. You already saw part of it, Caleb said. I saw structure, she replied. Not origin. That difference mattered more than she let show. A distant sound cut through the stable, metal gate shifting somewhere outside. Controlled movement. Not accidental. Caleb stepped slightly closer to the exit line of sight. Not hiding. Positioning. They're tightening perimeter checks, he said. Elizabeth looked toward the sound. Then he's accelerating. Yes. She nodded slowly. Then we don't wait for completion. Caleb met her gaze. We move now. A brief pause. Elizabeth reached up and tightened her gloves again. Not for riding this time, but for readiness. Where's the cleanest access point to older records? Caleb didn't hesitate. North Annex. Old administrative wing. That's monitored? Yes. Then we don't enter directly. Caleb studied her for a second. Side route. Service corridor, she corrected. One that hasn't been integrated into current oversight maps. That got his attention. You've studied the layout, he said. I've studied systems, she replied. This is one. Another pause. Caleb nodded once. Then we move before they update it. Elizabeth pushed off the post. Now. They left the stable without urgency, but without delay. Every step now had structure behind it. Not instinct anymore, design. As they moved across the open yard, Elizabeth noticed Marcus at a distance near the main house. He wasn't looking at them directly, but he didn't need to. His presence was already aligned with movement across the ranch. He was adjusting the system in real time. Caleb saw him too. He's watching patterns, Caleb said quietly. Then we break them, Elizabeth replied. A brief glance between them. No hesitation. No disagreement. Just alignment. They changed direction slightly, avoiding the main path entirely, cutting toward the outer maintenance structures instead. Less visibility. Less control. Behind them, the ranch continued functioning as if nothing was happening. But beneath that function, something was shifting faster now. And Marcus was no longer just managing it. He was responding to it. The service corridor entrance was hidden behind an older maintenance shed, partially obscured by stacked equipment and years of deferred attention. Nothing about it was marked in the current operational maps, exactly as Caleb had said. Elizabeth stopped just short of the door, scanning the area once. No visible guards. No active cameras at this angle. That didn't mean absence. It meant omission. And omission was never accidental on this ranch. Caleb reached for the handle, but paused. If we go in, we don't come out the same way. Elizabeth glanced at him. That's already happened. A brief silence. Then he opened the door. Inside, the corridor was narrow, utilitarian, and older than the ranch's current structure. The air felt and used, like it hadn't been part of the present system for years. Pipes ran overhead, some labeled with outdated codes. The lighting flickered inconsistently, not broken, just neglected. This wasn't integrated, Elizabeth said quietly. No, Caleb replied. It was bypassed. They moved forward. Every step echoed slightly more than it should have, as if the space itself wasn't designed for current occupancy. Elizabeth ran her hand lightly along the wall. This predates Marcus's restructuring. Everything does, Caleb said. That line carried more weight than it should have. They reached a junction. 3 paths. None labeled. Caleb stopped, studying the floor markings instead of the walls. Left leads to storage overflow. Right loops back, toward active maintenance. And forward? Elizabeth asked. Caleb hesitated. Administrative wing. That was the goal. They moved forward. The deeper they went, the more the corridors subtly changed, not in structure, but in intent. Cleaner lines. Less decay. This section had been maintained longer than the entrance suggested. Not abandoned. Just selectively preserved. Elizabeth noticed it immediately. This isn't unused. No, Caleb said. It's controlled neglect. A faint sound echoed ahead, distant movement. Not footsteps. Mechanical. A lock cycle or gate shift. Caleb slowed slightly. Elizabeth mirrored him. Someone is down here, she said. Yes. Marcus. Or someone who reports to him, Caleb replied. That distinction mattered. They reached a sealed door with an older manual locking system integrated into newer electronic overlays. A hybrid. Transitional infrastructure. Elizabeth studied it. He didn't fully replace the old system. He built over it, Caleb said. That's a vulnerability, she replied. It's also protection, he countered. A pause. Elizabeth stepped closer. Which one is it here? Caleb watched the lock for a moment. Both. She processed that, then shifted her focus. We don't force entry. Caleb nodded slightly. Agreed. Elizabeth examined the panel. There's a maintenance override cycle. If we sync with the next internal reset, we can pass through without triggering a log spike. Caleb looked at her. You know timing systems too? I told you, she said. I studied systems. A faint pause. Then Caleb stepped slightly aside. Then you lead. Elizabeth examined the manual locking mechanism, her fingers tracing the heavy iron levers that predated the newer electronic overlay. She waited, listening to the internal shift of the gears, a rhythm she remembered from her childhood spent following the ranch's old maintenance crews. With a deliberate, steady pull that required more strength than she expected, she tripped the secondary release. The door groaned before yielding with a heavy, physical thud, the weight of the past finally swinging open. Inside, the administrative wing was colder, more structured. Unlike the corridor, this space was actively maintained. Files were digitized here, old records partially archived, partially still in rotation. Elizabeth stepped inside first, and immediately stopped, not because of the room, because of the presence. Marcus stood by the heavy oak table in the center of the room, several open ledgers spread out before him in a display of calculated chaos. He didn't look up from the physical maps, his finger tracing a boundary line that had been redrawn in fresh ink. He looked like a general surveying a battlefield he had already won. As they approached, he slowly closed the book, the heavy thud of the cover echoing against the stone walls. There's a difference. Not anymore, she replied. Silence stretched between them, controlled, deliberate. Marcus's eyes moved briefly to Caleb. You brought him into this lair. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. He was already here. That landed differently than expected. Marcus studied them both now. Not emotional. Analytical. You're moving faster than I anticipated, he said to Elizabeth. You underestimated observation, she replied. A faint, almost imperceptible shift in his expression. That's your mistake, she added. For the first time, Marcus didn't respond immediately. The system around them continued running. Servers, files, controlled access points. But something in it had already changed. Because now all three of them were standing inside the part of the ranch that Marcus couldn't fully control anymore. The silence in the administrative wing wasn't empty anymore. It was structured, like everything else on the ranch, but now it felt exposed, as if the structure had been revealed rather than enforced. Marcus stood between Elizabeth and the terminal, but the balance in the room had already shifted. Caleb didn't move. Elizabeth didn't either. They had both learned the same thing in different ways. Rushing here would only confirm Marcus's control over tempo. Marcus broke the silence first. You shouldn't be here. Elizabeth's gaze stayed steady. You built a system where I was always supposed to end up here. A brief pause. That's not the same thing, Marcus replied. It is now, she said. The man at the terminal shifted slightly, waiting for instruction. Marcus raised a hand, not to stop him, but to hold him in place. Controlled stillness. Marcus looked at Elizabeth again. You've been influenced. No, she replied. I've been informed. His eyes flicked briefly toward Caleb again. By him. Caleb finally spoke, calm and direct. By structure. Their father, who had followed them into the shadows of the wing unnoticed, stepped into the light of the terminal. He didn't look at the screen, but his hand came down heavily on the ledger Marcus was holding, pinning it to the desk. The structure only holds as long as the foundation is honest, Marcus, the old man said, his voice reflecting the weight Elizabeth had felt earlier. Let her see the rest. Marcus didn't respond to that immediately. Elizabeth stepped forward one pace. Not aggressive, not hesitant, just enough to close distance. You said integration. You said alignment. You never said control. Marcus's expression tightened slightly. Those are not separate concepts. They are when one person decides all three, she said. Silence followed again, shorter this time, more charged. Marcus reached for the heavy leather-bound ledger on the desk, his fingers skimming the edge of the parchment as if checking for any physical disturbance. He adjusted the placement of the iron paperweight, a small, habitual gesture of alignment that matched the rigidity of the room. His focus remained on the ink and the paper, the tangible evidence of the empire he had built. Elizabeth saw it. That's your problem, she said quietly. You're still managing it in real time. Marcus looked at her again. You can't stabilize what's already been exposed. That was the turning point. Not loud, not dramatic, just structural recognition. Marcus stepped slightly away from the terminal for the first time. Not retreat. Repositioning. You think this gives you leverage, he said. It gives me clarity, Elizabeth replied. A pause. Caleb added quietly. And it removes your exclusivity over interpretation. Marcus looked at both of them now. Fully. For the first time, he wasn't speaking to an individual. He was speaking to alignment. You're making a mistake, he said. Elizabeth didn't blink. No, she replied. We're ending one. The room held still. Then Marcus turned slightly toward the terminal again, but didn't touch it. Because the system he built was no longer operating under single-direction control. And he knew it. Elizabeth stepped back slightly, not breaking eye contact. This isn't the end of the ranch. Marcus looked at her. It's the end of how it's been held. Caleb didn't add anything. He didn't need to. The structure around them remained intact. The authority inside it had just shifted permanently. Elizabeth didn't wait for Marcus to recover. She turned to the terminal, her fingers moving with the same timing Caleb had taught her in the dirt. She didn't try to crash his firewall. She bypassed it using the unmapped service codes from the archive. You focused on the locks, Marcus, she murmured, watching the data stream initiate. But you forgot the foundation was built on public land grants. I just mirrored the entire archive to the State Land Commission's server. Your move, she added, finally looking back. But the system just went transparent.